Yahweh, Talofa, Bula, Ali, Renalim, Afatai, um, all those other languages that I don't know. Hello, welcome to our space. We are so happy and lucky to introduce APICHAYA. They're here to talk to us about TV. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor or the space to these lovely, wonderful people to introduce themselves. Stella?
Oh, I can go first. Hey, my name is Stella. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Pacific Islander community organizer over at APICHAYA, and I'm going to pass it on to Lourdes.
Hafa Day. I'm Lourdes. I use they, them pronouns. I'm Chamorro from the island of Guahan, and I also work at APICHAYA as their Queer Network program organizer, and I also support NPI outreach and organizing as well. And I'll pass it to Lei.
Hi, this is Lei, also Sella. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm also with APICHAYA and community.
Welcome, ladies, and thank you. Mia, you want to take the floor?
Yeah, actually, Lourdes, I think, is going to ground the space really quickly for us.
Okay.
So I'm going to share a chant in Chamorro, and it's called Nana Nanahu, which means the mother of my mother. It was taught to me by Dakota Kamatsu, and a song by Ifan Lalayan, which is a Chamorro group back in Guahan. And the chant is about honoring our mother's mother. And I like to think of it, right, of our grandmothers, our ancestors we come from, but also mothering in the ways we care for our communities. And yeah, I hope that this can bring folks some grounding while we talk about some deep healing and hard things today. So, Zizi Smaasi, thank you. Ihaga hugirin naga na nanina na nanina na nanina Ihaga huginin naga na nanin na na nanin na na nanin na Ihagataginin naga nanininaw 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 nanininahu hanamagi Sainamasi, thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. And as always, it's really great to have APICHAYA with us. And, you know, we're covering one of those topics that's really heavy, domestic violence, and something that is very stigmatized in our community and not talked about. And so we would like to especially thank you for coming on and doing this like within community, knowing that it's a hard discussion and it's hard to understand sometimes for our community, but it's important for us to start to make that change. And so when we talk about domestic violence, especially for the three of you, like, what does that mean to you, and like how do you describe domestic violence to our community?
Thanks, Mia. I think before we get into it, I just want to name that we do work for APICHAYA, but we don't have all the answers for everyone, and that this is a learning space, and that I just want to say that what we share here is based off of our own experiences, and like what we also like our own knowledge, and yeah, and that I guess tackling this topic, it takes a bigger conversation, but we want to I just want to set the intention of the space that this is the, like you had mentioned, because sometimes I feel like coming from an island community, people be like, well, Sola said that it's like this and this, like it's like that, and da 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 da, and it's like, whoa, don't go quoting me now. Um, so I just wanted to name that, and also thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here. Um, yeah, and then I'm gonna pass it over to someone else, because domestic violence is like it's such a huge umbrella.
Yeah.
And there's so many components that thing. Lord, I don't know if Lourdes or Stella want to go into.
Yeah, I'm happy to offer a definition that we use within APICHAYA. So when we talk about domestic violence, domestic abuse, and intimate partner violence, these are terms that describe a pattern of behaviors that are used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner, usually in an intimate relationship, right? We hear this a lot when we talk about romantic, intimate partnerships. This could also happen across, like, in your families, right? We also want to like name that this is a very common and normalized form of violence that we see and many of us are survivors of, right, across the world. And that it also encompasses the experiences of emotional, physical, societal harm, right? And it can be experienced by everyone, right, across race, across age, across sexual orientation and gender, religion. And something else that we like to name at APICHAYA too is that we are also all capable of causing harm, right? In many contexts, but we're also capable of choosing and moving towards healing and accountability. And we could talk more about that soon, because I know some of those concepts are big and can have many meanings. But when we're thinking about it, especially in the Pacifica concept, right, and experience, I think it's important when we talk about domestic violence that we also remember the histories and legacies of violence and trauma that our Pacifica communities have experienced too, because that really informs the ways that, right, sometimes it can be silenced. Like when we think about our cultural norms, and it was mentioned earlier that this form of violence is very stigmatized, right? And I think it's important for us to also look back about what many of our ancestors survived to really inform the ways that violence really shows up in our communities now. So some of those examples are like war, right? Colonization, displacement, right? The things that our communities have survived due to that, and how that may also create like more waves of violence that happens within our communities. Also to name white supremacy, right? Like surviving these systems, these types of oppressions, these legacies of harm are also very connected to the ways that violence shows up within and among us.
Right. And I think that's something we don't talk about very much, is how these different things that we experience throughout our life can contribute and kind of lead to domestic violence if we aren't kind of facing it head on and saying like this is a cause, like how do we heal from generational trauma or things like that. So that's very important, I think, that you named that. And so thinking about domestic violence, I know it's like there's a lot of things that can count as domestic violence, but are there any specific examples that you could give people so that they can kind of get an understanding of what it could look like?
It's like,
I think for many of us in the Pacifica households, we don't realize that it's also, it could come from our parents, it could come from grandparents, it could be with your own siblings. Um, Many of us live in extended family homes, and so you could have cousins, aunts and uncles that also are part of the household that also contribute to domestic violence. So it's not always the norm that people are used to with relationships with your husband, your wife, um, boyfriend or girlfriend. It could also come from within the household. And that's the part that's really sad because many of us don't realize um, that you can voice when something is uncomfortable for you. Many of us here, I know as a parent, something I always taught my children was not to allow people to touch your personal areas, right? And to be very specific about not letting anyone, whether it's your parents or anybody, touch you in those areas. And sometimes, they think that because you're in a household with people that are, quote unquote family, that it's okay. But, it's like you have to be so specific about your conversations. Um, in many of our households, it is okay for our extended family to also punish, um, or have a say when someone in the house is doing something wrong. You give them the okay to tell them, don't do that. It's not okay to do this or do that. But sometimes that gets dragged out into something that, we growing up, we don't know that something that may be happening if you're getting, if it goes from a slap on the hand to tell you not to touch the outlet, or touch the socket, and then it becomes something that grows from there. Many times we don't attribute that to domestic violence. So, it grows. It could start from something so small as, my sister telling my child to stop doing something, and then the relationship becomes, I don't want to say closer, but it opens up a segue where, oh, I got away with slapping their hand. Who's to say the next time it doesn't turn into a slap on the face? Who says it doesn't turn into something more physical that then becomes more than just correcting, a child from doing something like touching the outlet, or touching something with the hand, it becomes more so fast. And people take something as trusted as helping to raise um, children within a household. They take it on to where it becomes more than just that, because it's a privilege. To me, I find it that it's a privilege when you live in a household with more than just the usual father and mother, and you are counting on your household to help you raise your children. Um, but when it becomes something more than that, when people take the liberty and take that role, and it becomes more into a beating, and it becomes abuse, it can form into something else so quickly.
yeah, no, I was gonna say, just going off of piggybacking off of what Lay was saying, or I mean Stella was saying, um, yeah, and connecting it back to what Lourdes named earlier, that sometimes it is like domestic violence really is like all about power and control. Um, and I think in our communities, because again, going back into our history, of like we used violence in order to survive, going back to the wars and stuff. And so violence tends to turn into a way of seizing control. So what Lay was just taught, or I mean, sorry, excuse me, I keep using
It's okay.
Okay, I was like, whatever name they go by, like
Stella or Lay is okay.
person on camera. It's like, I'm just kidding. What do you call it? Great. Now you made me lose my thought. It's like, okay, no, but I was just saying, like, that is a way that people use to control children, and like other forms of that can be like through financial, like controlling their finances, controlling like their freedom, like, I think there's a fine line between like protecting your children and just flat out like not letting your children, like, or not letting anyone for that matter, like, I don't want to say like be out there, but like, I mean, you know what I mean? You don't give them any type of agency. And so, yeah, but yeah, like, I was just trying to answer your question where you were saying like, what does it look like? And there's a lot, like DV shows up in so many different ways, shows up in like isolation, which I see there's a question down here that asks, how does DV show up in the era of COVID-19? Which is like, we witnessed it like during this pandemic, that the calls, because of isolation, our hotline calls have actually increased, because when you're stuck in a home where you don't have any type of control in it, like, where do you, like, I guess that's like the big question, like, what's your exit plan? How do you find resources to get out? And I think that's the unique thing about APICHAYA services, is that it's based off of the survivor's need, rather than like, oh, we're gonna report you because I'm a mandated reporter by law, and we understand like, how separations of families and stuff work and how it impacts our communities, especially. I think I'm just sorry, I'm in my head now because there's so many examples that I've heard during the pandemic, where DV showed up. And like, it's even more complicated with family relationships because you also want to honor the family. I think I speak from experience, not to put my mom out there like I usually do. She's good with it. We had a great conversation about this, so she's comfortable with it. But like, one of the complicated things with her story was like, because she had children, she couldn't seek help. She had all the financial means to get out of the relationship, but she also wanted to honor her children's relationship with their father, because at the same time, it gets complicated when your partner is great to other people, just not to you, like, it just gets even more complicated. So yeah, I think like there's no, like, I guess, right or wrong way to solve this, but it all depends on the individual. And so like, that's where API Chaya kind of comes in, because they kind of look at your situation, because sometimes people are not financially stable. Sometimes people stay in relationships because they some kids stay with their parents even though their parents beat the hell out of them, excuse my language, because where are they gonna go if you ain't got a job? Like, especially our youth. I think about our youth a lot, doing schooling at home, and people like, I don't know if y'all watch like TikTok or whatever, but there's these like memes where like parents are literally beating their kids. Like they're like, I'm your teacher now, you know, like, and people think it's funny. Like, can we normalize that it's not funny to beat your children? Like, I get that to we use humor, you know, to kind of cope, but I was watching it and I was like, that's not funny. Like,
Yeah.
how then you teach your child that if they fail or like if they make a mistake, that they're going to be punished.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact of that, we see it today with numbing themselves through drug addiction. Like there's so much I think there's just so much. Like I don't think people realize how much DVSA, drug addiction, joining gangs, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think people realize how much they actually intersect. Like, in the Tongan way, we call it, I forget what the Tongan word is, but the concept is relative movement. And so in our dances, I'm just taking it back to cultural stuff because it makes it more relatable for me. Um, but in our dances, we find beauty and balance. And so what you do on one side, you do it to the other. And the reason why they do that, because there's like this plane, like a plane that's like this. And a lot of times the reason why they do the same movement on this side to the other side is because what happens over here impacts what's going to happen over here. So then when we look at DV and we look at the state of our community, especially when we have like, I'm sure you all have seen our data as far as like the Pacific Islander people are, like we suffer from like things like poverty, addiction. Like granted, our statistics in education has gone up, but our other statistics have gone up too. I mean, we're the highest group impacted by COVID-19. Anyways, I'm going on a rant now because I was just so angry and I felt like this space was safe enough for me to like just go off. But but no, you know, like yeah, like how does this show up in the era of COVID-19? We're looking at it right now. We're looking at they said that the alcohol sales have gone up. And I was like, and I'm not judging because y'all know like I love to party. But what do you call it, you know? But then it's like what is the root of that? You know, like what is the root of everything that's going on? And a lot of times it begins in the home and it begins with power and control. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that.
No, but you bring up such good points about it because, you know, when you're home, especially during this lockdown, and you don't, you know, like when they shut everything down, you know, before essential workers were able to go back. And to be honest, think about it, many of our people are essential workers. They're
Right.
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
when everything shut down and you're now being locked in with the person who causes you and your children harm, you know, you have nowhere to go. You know, you really are a prisoner in your own home and be trying to figure out a way to like maybe make a run to the store or take a trip, you know, to walk around the block. It could be challenging, you know, because even walking out that door is a taboo, you know, something that's not allowed. You know, so it was really frightening to think about the people who are stuck in those walls with the person who's causing them harm and who don't have a voice, who can't, you know, get away to their jobs, to have, you know, like that breath of freedom, or, you know, whether it may be that, you know, a lot of times work is their way of coping to get out of that situation. And as easy as it is for people to talk about having a plan, an escape plan, it's not really possible when you're working a job that's making minimum wage or barely making ends meet, you know, trying to get out I mean, I could talk about personal experience. I could remember trying to like put away peanuts just so that I could have um, a day to go get ice cream with my kids, right? So to think about someone trying to use those same funds to save up as an escape, it's not that easy. A lot
Yeah.
of times, you know, the person causing harm is in a place of power in the household. And so they're the one controlling the cash. And so you can't just ask for a simple $10 bill so that you can go get Starbucks, you know, take a walk or whatever. So it's very scary. And for the increase in calls that were coming in, um, somebody trying to flee, you know, it's just so sad because where are they going to go during the pandemic when many shelters are closed or
Yeah.
full? You know, many places don't have hotel vouchers at the time to accommodate for these things. And if you have kids, it's even harder. So, you know, my heart goes out to moms and dads who are dealing with domestic violence in their homes. And now you have to be a teacher. Now you're doing homeschool.
Mhm.
You know, it's just a very scary thing during COVID-19. You know, we want to be safe, but at the same time, you have survivors
Mhm.
trying to get out of their homes and back to work just so that you know, they have a release.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Lei. It's so important to name that, especially during COVID. We also know that there has been an increased rate of children and young folks reporting childhood sexual abuse, right? A rise in that during COVID. And like, you know, what you were saying, Leigh, around like not having freedom to leave, right? Imagine like also thinking about young folks, how school must have been a safe haven for them, right? To
Exactly.
be able to like not have to undergo abuse from family, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And I think that's something else that is important to name. Um, Also to think about folks who are disabled in our Pacifica community and across communities, disabled folks, our elders, right? Queer and trans folks that also are having to navigate like state violence, right? And we know this across our communities and Black and Indigenous communities too. Like all of these forms of violence are so interconnected, right? And when we think about it being gender-based, like I also want to like lift up and name like the ways that queer and trans and disabled survivors are navigating things right now, especially but yeah, right? We're thinking about all the people
Yeah.
who are the most impacted and marginalized, right? Right now, because it's like who are our usual people that we're able to connect to? And I think we can talk more about this as we converse, but like what you were saying, Sela, around power and control, right? Like when someone is in that position to have all of the power, it takes agency away from the person that's surviving the violence, right? And the ways that people that are causing harm do this is they objectify the person. They see them as an object instead of having a person with dignity, honoring their humanity, a person that has power and agency. They they purposely flip that away from people, right? Um,
Mhm.
and that's where it can lead into isolation. That's where like these resources that are usually readily available pre-COVID are so much harder to gain access to, like you were saying, Lei and Sela, like there isn't, like, in folks' homes, there's probably not a lot of spaces to really go and try to make calls, right, without being heard. Or like, if like maybe the person that's causing harm works from home, like, there's like so much more, I know stressors, right? And like vigilance that can happen where the person that is surviving, or even parents, like you said, Lei, that want to protect their children too and are surviving a lot during these times. So my heart also goes out to folks because, yeah, these times are really hard. And, we know this for survivors, like usually the first people folks turn to is not the state, right? It's not usually reporting to the police. It's like telling loved ones, it's telling our family, it's telling our friends. And when we don't have those connections, especially in these times of COVID, like just imagine so many people that are surviving and suffering because they don't feel like they can be in connection to people. Like especially when we think about the impacts of COVID. So yeah, this stuff is just like such deep work, and it's also heartbreaking, and I'm hoping that, with this conversation, we can continue thinking about how can we, as people that are supporting survivors, really be aware of the signs, right? When the red flags that we may be noticing, like when it comes to domestic violence, because I feel like, Lei, you talked about this, like it's actually like really hard to leave, right? And like, sometimes it's complicated, right? Like sometimes the person that's harming us, we do love them and we do care about them and we don't want them to go to jail, right? And or like the ties with our family and our children, we're like, oh, like if I leave, there's no economic support, right, that I have access to. And that it also is that the stage of trying to leave is probably the most dangerous time, right, for like survivors, because the potential of experience more violence and also the impact of losing different ways of like survival make it even more risky, right, for someone to leave. So I think I also just want to name that to dispel this belief, that question that a lot of people ask, like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you leave? Right? Like, it's actually a lot deeper and more complex than just like this act of leaving, right? It's layered.
Yeah, extremely.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Sala was saying about power, because um, in some communities, I know mine, where is like the line that we draw between disciplining a child and it being domestic violence? Because I know a lot of members of our community, they're religious people, and there is a verse in Proverbs that says, if you
spare
love
the
your
rod,
child,
not in the child.
exactly. So, sometimes where does it become violent? Like, abuse. When does it disciplining a child becomes abusive? Because, sometimes they will say, well, you were right in disciplining your child. But then we know that to question it is like questioning our faith. So a lot of times, people believe that it is their Christian right or God given right to discipline their spouse or their children, because they said, well, it's right here, if they're not acting accordingly. Me as a head of a family or an elder in the family, it is my job and duty to, discipline. But then that's one of the things that is making this, talking about it taboo, because in my community, you're questioning your faith, and it a lot of people get really, I mean, you guys are Islanders,
It's personal.
I know
It gets personal. Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, because I grew up like in Bible studies and stuff. I think for me, there's a lot, and I'm sitting here like trying to watch my tongue and how I come off. But there's a lot of there's a lot to explore with the way Christianity was introduced to us, especially when it comes to the Bible. So for me, this is for me, not for anybody else, and I'm not preaching to anyone. But there's a biblical concept that God God does not contradict himself, right? And so if God is a creator, he would not destroy, right? And so I kind of I'm trying to like think of how to like I'm just gonna say I'm just gonna be blunt. I've been blunt this whole time. What's the point of me thinking? The Bible is a guide, right? It wasn't created to be taken literally, because first of all, it was translated into English, right? So the language kind of changes, and so that's a form of abuse that white supremacy used to
Mhm.
control brown folks.
Yep.
When you explore a little bit deeper and you read a little bit deeper into the Bible, you will find that our God is loving, right?
Yeah.
Like, whether you believe in indigenous gods or whatever God, the message at the end of the day, and this is me to my own Tongan people, like, um, at the end of the day, the message is to love. How do you find like when they say spare the rod, rot in the child? I don't see it as literally take a rod and beat the heck out of your child until they get on the path of the straight and narrow. Spare the rod and rot in the child is more of a metaphor, if you will,
Mhm.
of like discipline, but it doesn't necessarily mean physical discipline. That's just the language that it was translated into, right? Like, but again, like I said, all you Christian people are going to come for me, and I know it, and I'm okay. I'm okay with it because I stand on the word of God. And no, because that for a long time I struggled with that, and and I'm just gonna say it, like, I have family members and family members who live in my home right now who struggle with it, especially being part of the LGBTQ community. You know what I mean? Like, they literally beat themselves because our families literally physically beat them and mentally abuse them when they come out with what their sexuality is, right? And I always sit and like I'm like, if we preach the true message of God, you know what I mean? What does that look like? What does love look like? How do we redefine that? 'Cause the way that I see it in the Bible that I'm reading, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine in my mind. I can't imagine me preaching a message of love and beating my child. I can't. Like, I can imagine correcting behavior, like, but I can't imagine, like, because then now I question your faith, because at the end of the day, Jesus was a humanitarian. Like, you know, the Pharisees are the one who beat Jesus up with the whip.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sitting here like, Jesus never physically abused anyone. So where did they get this idea that it's okay to physically beat people, Like, so that's why I say, like, I think with that, my response is always like, I question, like, I don't question our community's faith. I question where how they learned it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, that's another form of abuse that white supremacy used to, like, oppress people. And I'm gonna say it because I openly tell people I love Jesus. Like, and everyone's like, I'm confused. You love Jesus, but you love all these other things too. And I go, yeah, just like Jesus. Jesus loved prostitutes too. Like, what? Like, get out of here. Like, but like I said, I was like, there's a way to discipline your children that is love. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
definitely
Can I add to that
yeah,
too,
go
Scylla?
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. And Esther, I grew up, I'm Tongan and Samoan. I grew up Tongan, very much in the church as well. And shoot, we got whoopings regularly. Maybe me more than the others, because maybe I was a bit more naughty than my siblings. I don't know. But man, and they weren't fun, right? But I have children of my own. And Netta actually brought this up in the comments. She went through violence and is trying to deal with not passing that on to her son. Something that I had to learn on my journey after the very abusive domestic violence situation was learning that I had to communicate. Words were power. And for me, it was literally stopping in my tracks. And instead of raising my hand to my kids, thinking about what am I trying to tell them? Where was the disconnect? Did I ask them to pick up something and they didn't do it? And why didn't they do it? So it became more using my words and saying to them, I needed you to pick that up off the ground so that I can finish vacuuming. I need you to pay attention in school because your education is going to be your power in the future. What is it exactly that we are trying to relay to our children? Why are we using our hands and fists and objects versus our words, right? And unfortunately, in the past, I have put my hands on my kids, as a young mother growing up, coming out of a Tongan household, receiving the hand myself. But as I grew and learned, right, and learned what domestic abuse looked like and saw that it wasn't just what I received from my parents, wasn't what I received from my other half, it's also what we are putting out. And so for me, it was, where was the disconnect? It was always communication. Somebody did not communicate to me, or I didn't communicate to my kids what I needed them to do. We have to remember that as babies, you are already picking up what your surrounding is in your mother's belly. Whatever we are dealing with when we carry our children, they are already feeling it as a newborn inside. Now we're birthing them. They're coming out to the environment, possibly the same environment that they heard while in your stomach. And now they are now being accustomed to this. So until we teach our kids to put away their toys, they're not going to know what that is. They're not going to know that saying the F word is a bad word. They don't know what good is. And so we have to use our words and teach our children, these actions. It's not just, slapping them for no good reason. In the past, it was, you tell them, don't pull the extension cord or the cord out of the outlet. Why are we telling them not to do that? You have to explain it, right? Once you explain it to them, they may have to do it again to get a little electrocuted, or, before they learn. Some of us, we had to do that to learn, but it's communication. We don't have to use our hands. And also, the words that we use are so sharp, So domestic violence also comes across the way that you speak to your children or the way that you communicate with others. You fell in love with your partner at one moment in time because you love them for some reason. Somewhere along the way, communication was lost, and you're not doing it as effectively as you did when you were dating, possibly. So for me, violence and discipline, it's different, when in the way that you act it out. Discipline could be in your words. It could be a slap on the hand, but it does become too much when now, they're literally in fetal position crying or can't even voice it because they're crying so hard. At every, there has to be control. There always has to be control, and you are your own agency to stop at any point in time and think about, is what I'm doing really teaching them a lesson?
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Lay and Stella, for your response. And this question, Esther, I think as a parent myself too, I really resonate like with, really believing now I have the responsibility to break cycles of violence in my family and in my ancestry and in my lineage and for future to come, right? And I think what Lay was saying around communication, wow, right? Like that is at the heart, right? Like when we're able to understand what our needs are, what our children's needs are, for them to even trust and tell us no sometimes, right? Like I was never able to tell my parents no, right? Like there was no space for me to be like,
No.
respond, right? That would be called disrespectful or I'm talking back. And actually, as a child, I was probably just trying to communicate that something I didn't like, right? Or something that I didn't want to do. And I think there's now that we have more tools, right? Like, I think, yes, we can be compassionate and honor that maybe our parents and their parents' parents have survived so much that they were probably trying to do their best, but still caused harm, right? And now it's like, what is our responsibility now that maybe a lot of that healing falls on us to do, right? And I think for me as a parent, now I'm realizing like, wow, like it feels like I don't really have a blueprint to know how to do this right when the model for it was physical violence, right? To discipline me. It may not have been, my parents would always be like, it's not as bad as what my parents did to me. And I'm like, that's great. I'm happy that's changed, but it still is hurtful, right? It's still causing harm. So I think when we want to practice love, like Stella was saying, like this Bell Hooks quote I love so much. And she talks about in particular, she's like, abuse and neglect negate love. And when we're talking about how we're teaching our children, how we're loving them, it's about affirmation, it's about care, it's about communication. And she says, she's like, no one can rightfully claim to be loving when behaving abusively. Yet parents do this all the time in our culture. I think she's like talking about culturally and societally, right? And as a Black author, and she's like, children are told that they are loved even though they are being abused. And I think when we think about that, we have to notice that, like, what is that teaching our children, right? How are they going to carry on these cycles of harm and violence into future relationships? And when we say, like, we want to break this cycle of violence, it starts with us. It really does. It's like what Lay, you were saying. I love that you reflected. You're like, I did some things that did harm my children in the past, but I reflected and I wanted to change, right? And I think that's the commitment that I feel like I want to invite folks to do because yeah, we have tools that are hard to change. And I think Netta, you talked about that. Like a lot of my defaults, right? Sometimes I want to yell at my kid, and I'm like, okay, pause. Like, what's actually going on? Like you were saying, Lay, like, what am I holding? What is something that I learned and how to respond? And like when I know the impact on my kid, like I was telling this to friends recently. It's such a gift that my kid can tell me no. He's not scared to. He's like, actually, that hurt me. And I was like, wow, you're right. Like, what I said was hurtful. Like, what does it look like for us in our communities to practice apologizing for our actions? What does it look like for us in our communities to receive like hard feedback when we did hurt someone instead of responding right in a harmful or violent behavior? What does it look like for us to pause and be like, I hurt someone I love and care deeply for. What can I do to change that? Right? And like I was saying, our kids are so absorbent. They may not like sometimes they may not be able to communicate what they see, but they can see and they can feel, right? Like I knew when violence was happening in my house, right? As a kid, I could feel it, right? Tension and conflict. And like, what does it look like for us to teach our kids that conflict is okay, that saying no is okay, that we can apologize and that we mess up too, and that their parents are human, right? The adults in their lives are human, and that we can extend compassion to them as much as they are willing to extend compassion to us. So I think when we think about domestic violence in this context, right? Like I recommend this book. It's called The Revolution Starts at Home. It's a whole like anthology of thinking about in like specifically in social justice, like organizing communities, how domestic violence happen. But that concept of like the revolution starts at home, it literally does, right? Like when we're raising our children in any capacity, if you're an aunt, you're an uncle, a grandparent, a parent, or even a friend, like in any capacity, like what does it look like to really honor young people's like agency and bodies and consent and celebrate them in their joy and mistakes, right? Like, and I think that's something that I feel like a lot of us are still healing our own inner children, right? Because we may have survived so much that our parents had survived. And now it's like, what does it look like for us to receive and be like, oh, I actually do want to do something different. I don't want to use violence, to communicate what I'm feeling to my child. So I just want to like invite folks to think and pause, right? Like the pause between us enacting harm can really change violence from happening. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to leave just a little bit of time. We had a couple questions come through. And so I'll post this first one. It says, my boyfriend is jealous and says I want to sleep with other men if I'm talking to someone in public and starts a fight calling me names. My friend says that's abuse, but isn't jealousy just a way to show how much you love?
No. Jealousy is never a sign of love. I think growing up, many of us, I can say for myself, we confuse the feeling that we have, that jealousy, that the way our partners act when they say that they're jealous, and we confuse that with love. Jealousy is never love. Many times it's a sign of insecurity for the other person. And man, I used to remember going places and people looking at me and my partner, getting upset with me as if I could control what other people are doing. Like I could put a black bag over my head and walk around for people not to look at me. We can't control when other people are looking at us or give us a compliment, and we shouldn't be afraid to receive compliments from people. So if your boyfriend is showing signs of jealousy and telling you that, it definitely is a sign of abuse. It is not love, and it's a conversation to be had. Why do they feel jealous? They may be insecure because you probably look beautiful and they're afraid that you may run off with somebody. But that's a conversation between you and your partner to assure them and to really affirm that you two are in love with each other, that regardless of what looks, compliments you may receive, to feel trust in your relationship. But it definitely is never a sign of love. We in society, especially those of us now, there's been this false sense of affirmation around, oh, if your boyfriend or your girlfriend acts jealous, they love you even more. No, it's not. It's something that we've learned. I know it's something that I've seen in my household. And I always thought it was normal and I thought it was okay. But when those acts of jealousy turn into violence, we know it definitely is not love. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add or share more to that question.
Thank you, Lei. I feel like there's another question that's related to that. What are some signs of an abusive relationship? That just came in. And I just wanted to kind of add on to what Lei was saying. Like sometimes, when you notice there is a sense of insecurity in a relationship, like jealousy or trying to control, to say, because of that jealousy, I don't want you to see your friends anymore, right? Like there's often the power and control that we keep talking about. There's a way, that's a strategy of isolating people from actually having supportive networks, right? A lot of the times when we are supporting survivors, we're like, who are people you trust that could show up for you? And oftentimes, like in surviving domestic violence, some folks are like, I no longer have people that can care, like that are in my networks, because their abuser, the person that has caused them harm, has isolated them from that, right? I think other signs of abuse is using intimidation, right? Like smashing things, destroying things, right? Like property, or like hurting pets, or um, displaying weapons, right? Like there's so many different ways that this can manifest, right? Using coercion and threats. Like we could also share this out with the PI Health Board, but these are all on this wheel called the power and control wheel. And there's different versions of it, like based off of communities too, right? Like particular communities, but there's all these different ways that you can kind of flag when you notice these things, right? Like for instance, if you're a friend that you notice, you're like, hey, I haven't seen my friend in a long time. Maybe I should check in on them because they haven't been talking to me or returning my calls. And maybe they've told you once or twice, like, that they've been having some, hard times with their partner or something, right? Or the person that they're living with. And there's been some red flags. I think I like to invite folks to, like, if it's in your gut to like want to like know more, or like it feels like something's off, maybe check in, right? Like check in with your loved ones. I think other signs that abuse can be taking place, right, is this was also talked about earlier around economic abuse, right? Like holding money, like if you have the power, if you're able to like control the finances, right? And those are other things that are important to notice. Also, sometimes, folks that are causing harm, especially in domestic violence, use children against the person that they're harming, right? Which is also very heartbreaking. A lot of us are familiar with the term like gaslighting, right? Or like minimizing and denying when someone is saying that they're being harmed, or something harmful is happening to them. Those are other signs that abuse could be happening too. Does anyone else want to add?
I think I can just add. Um, I know Mia put in the chat, what are some signs of an abusive relationship? Um, it's the bullying, the threats to control, um, when they start to take control of your money, you know, wanting to know when you get paid, when, what are you spending it on? Getting upset if you're spending on yourself or spending on loved ones, family. When there's physical abuse, a lot of times the physical abuse is hidden. They've become so comfortable with you that they know where to hit so that it doesn't show, and then you find yourself changing your clothing to wear something baggier or wear something that would cover, that's going to cover up um, where the bruises and things are. And it comes in so many signs. It's keeping you from your family, keeping you from your friends. Um, the language is, the manipulation has a lot to do with it. You could have plans to do something that you've been waiting to do with your sister, your mom, and all of a sudden the day before, the day of, there's an argument. and now you don't feel like going anywhere anymore because, you're not in the mood anymore. So those are signs of it. And Esther had mentioned that my sister keeps going back to her abuser. She claims it's for the sake of her kids, but I'm scared for her. How do I get her out? And that's one of the hardest parts about domestic violence. Somebody who's going through it can hear from everybody around them, because they witnessed the domestic violence. Until that person is at their place and ready to leave, it's so hard to get somebody to go until they're fully ready. And especially with kids, it's even harder. And there's groups, there's support groups. And just being there, just making yourself available to your loved ones, letting them know. I think for me, when I was in my situation, hearing from people all the time, if you want to go, I'm here to help you. Those sort of things. It just meant so much, because you really do not realize that you have a support group until you're out of it. Then you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I leave before? Well, you're literally, your head is clouded. When they say love is blind, literally you are blinded. You don't see or hear anything that is said against your partner until you are ready to be out of that situation.
I was just wondering, since the main reason is for the kids, would it be wrong to point their attention to the kids that if they're not happy with them fighting? I mean, to me, I feel like it'll be so much better for the kids to grow up in a loving environment than to just stay and just watch, everything that's going on and thinking, because I feel like, it's like a cycle, because the kids, the longer a mother use the kids, like I have to stay for my kids, but then for the girls, me personally, I feel like the girls are looking at the way a man is treating their father, is treating their mom, and thinking, okay, this is normal. If they grow up and be in a relationship where the man beat them, and they're like, well, my dad did the same thing with my mom, so it's okay. And for the boys to look at their dad and go, well, if my girlfriend or my wife is, making me mad, it's okay for me to do this because my dad did it to my mom, so why not?
Yeah. Honestly, I think in the Pacifica community, that is a lot of what we take with us. I know for me, myself, and many of my cousins that I've spoken to, that's what led me and what kept me in my relationship so long is witnessing my mom staying in an abusive relationship for so long, and then thinking that was the way it was supposed to be. And oh my God, it is so not the way it is supposed to be. We find ourselves afraid to be happy for whatever reason, and it shouldn't be that way. And for me personally, staying in my situation made it harder for my kids because just like you said, they witnessed it, and so they thought it was normal. And so now it's a lot of healing, not only for myself, but for them. It's continuous healing, unlearning so many stigmas that we thought were a cultural norm, and, as hard as it is to take your kids away from that so-called home, it was so much healthier for us to get away from that, for the kids' sake, as along with the person who's receiving the harm.
I was going to say, Esther, just because that's what kept Lay in her relationship, but that's what keeps me out of relationships. Was watching harm, which is fine. I'm a lone wolf. It's cool. Um, but also on the same token, that trust issue that I have with other people now, and Lay talking about like not knowing what love looks like and not being able to receive it. It also is why I become the person doing harm. Like someone coming to me and trying to be nice, and me all of a sudden I'm on like defense mode. I'm ready to punch you, like get away from me. And it's like, whoa, I was just trying to get to know you and your name. And I'm like, no, you weren't. You were here for all the wrong reasons, like, and a lot of people are always like, why are you like that? Like, why are you always trying to fight somebody? And it's like, yo, because in the home that I grew up in, my mom didn't fight back. So what that taught me was like, I have to fight back, like, even if the person means well, even if that person means well, I'm going to always have like, that's probably the hardest thing that I'm unlearning is like, nobody's out to get you. So like, chill, like relax. But like, it does cause a lot of harm because even in my own work life, right? Like, I don't trust nobody. Like everyone's always like, you're so low key. And I'm like, because I don't trust anyone. It took me forever to trust the PI health board. Like, and that's just being real, right? That's just being real. Like everyone kept saying, no, you should be here. And I'd be like, nah, I'm cool. Like, but it also contradicted like me being in community, like me. And I love that, something I'm learning from Lourdes. I consider like Lourdes, I'd be like, yo, you're like a guru. Like, um, I could hear Lourdes talk about the same things over and over again and still learn something new each time. Um, but something that I'm learning, that it's okay to allow my community to hold me. It's okay to seek support. It's okay to ask for help. I don't always have to be a bad bee or whatever, it is that this generation is picking up because of harm that they see. And it's okay for me to like own all of me and like my masculine side, like, um, because I feel like people don't understand the depths of like what violence really does, to a person, like to the point where your children don't go seeking for love sometimes, like we always talk about like children, you find love in all the wrong places, or whatever. And I'm like, and I'm the opposite. I block all blessings. Like I'm just like, nope, I can do it on my own. But yeah, like there's it's not like a one or the other. There's like a huge spectrum, right? Like of yeah, and that's it.
Wow. These are all strong, powerful messages, especially because there are some communities I've seen lately on Facebook. I've seen videos from back home and like people that are in my community and other community where they're videoing, people getting beaten up, and it's like, why isn't there like a big crowd and nobody's stopping it? They're like, in one, I saw one commented that, it's none of their business. And this guy was just beating up his wife, and there were all these, mean things in the comment. And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't know what she's done, but she's a human. She doesn't deserve to be beaten and have almost the whole community looking and nobody stopping it. And there's also this thing where, it's none of our business. That's his wife or that's her husband. Because, even women, you see them on the video on social media getting beaten. And I was like, wow, when did this become normal? Because I know that these usually happen behind closed doors, but nowadays, last year, I'm seeing so many videos being uploaded of domestic violence being accepted. And I'm like, wow. Yeah, and I'm really, really happy that we're doing this because, we need to bring awareness to it and try to bring, put a stop to it because it's not right and it shouldn't be normal.
I totally agree. And I think that's how, the silence in our communities, the ways that we tell people that it's not our business, right? How people are so like desensitized to violence because responding to it is not normalized, right? Like we'll keep it under the rug. It will be like behind the, closed doors. And I think, like you were saying, Esther, it's so important that we are having conversations like this to let our communities know that this isn't okay. Like we know the impacts into the future of how, and in our past, of how violence, like you were describing, Stella, like it has extreme impacts on our social, like emotional, spiritual well-being, right? And if we really want to access healing, it has to be like by stopping violence, right? Like or recognizing it when it comes up in ourselves as I also want to honor a lot of the ways we had to survive. And I feel like you said this, Stella, it's like violence what is a tool in which, right? Like we've used to survive. Um, which is really valid, right? And when we're thinking about like fighting against oppressions that continue to harm our communities. And it also makes me think about API Chaya talks a lot about this too, like criminalized survivors, right? Oftentimes there are people, our Pacifica people who are incarcerated, especially like women identified folks, right? Queer and trans folks who are Pacific people that fought against the person that was causing the violence and are now incarcerated, right? And have to face like no one looks at the story of them having to survive so much violence. There's no compassion for that. And and how are these prison systems also an extension of the violence, right, that our communities also face? Um, yeah, I wanted to name that because everything's connected, right? And going back to your question, Esther, about like what can it look like to support like your sister or a loved one who is surviving violence? Like I think what you're doing now is like thinking about resources, right? Like what are the ways, like when we're in community and when we're in relationship to people, that is a huge resource, right? Like I love what you said, Lay, when people were offering, being like, I'm here when you need me. Like, what does that look like for us to really build in that way? To be like, hey, I know that this is happening. It may be really hard for you to want to leave, but I just want you to know that I'm there in the ways that I can be, right? And that here are these resources that can also support you. And I think we want to share API Chaya's helpline, which is open Mondays through Fridays from to 10 to 4 p.m. Um, on our helpline, there's an advocate on duty that you can talk to, right? If you have questions, if you want to get resources, if you're looking for someone to support you in advocacy around your survivorship of violence. There's also like the King County here in Washington State in Duwamish Territory. There's the King County crisis line, right? When our helpline or other helplines are not open, there's a 24-hour helpline that you could also talk to folks. But like beyond a helpline, I think reaching out to like folks like us, right? Or like if you know someone and want to be connected to someone that looks like you, that comes from a cultural background as you, like we're here, and in this Pacifica like community context. Because I think that's the beauty of the work at API Chai is that we really also want to remember that it's important for us to know that there's cultural context, right, around the ways we have to navigate violence and to be really intentional to give people those services, with also remembering that we have many lived experiences and to like work with people that really reflect understanding, and your community is also vital because it's hard enough to reach out for help, right? It's hard enough to say that to recognize that you may need it. And I love the example that Stella gave. It's just like, yeah, like this is the time, right, that we can think about that and lean into it's okay to receive support, um, and also recognize the reasons why it's hard and there may be barriers to that because of so much of the things we've survived. So, yeah, I'm extending a lot of love to folks who are in, surviving right now, and also people that are loved ones that want to support survivors. Um, it's not easy work, and it's also so important to receive care and take care of yourself while doing it, and reach out. To APICHAYA, reach out to your loved ones. Let them know that, you know, let them know what you need to let them know around survivorship. Um, yeah, because I feel like relationships, really building relationships is so key to supporting survivors.
And I just want to add too that any calls that do come into API Chaya, they are confidential. We know how small the Pacifica community is, but we are very big on confidentiality and, um, making sure that the person is in a safe space to speak, and making sure that there are processes in place in case they have to hang up the phone, or if they're searching something online, that they can close it and it won't come back up to get them in trouble and stuff like that. So I think too, just having conversation, speaking, having dialogue around domestic violence and what it looks like and what healthy relationships could be is so big, and um, a way to address domestic violence. Is what is yeah, we know what domestic violence looks like, but what does changing that? What's the healthy look like? In a relationship, and in homes, and especially extended family homes, and teaching our kids from little, from when they're small, um, what love looks like, what healthy love looks like, and what healthy communication looks like, is really big. But sharing, especially the resources that we normally never knew was out there, is also a big thing that we can have for those that we know that are experiencing domestic violence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and thank you so much for being with us. Are there any other resources you would like to share, or any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm like just echoing what Lourdes and Salah mentioned. Yeah, just sending heck of love to everybody. I know these kind of conversations are not easy. Um, and I speak from experience, right? As I'm sure everyone does. But I think one of the scariest conversations I had was last week with my mom. And like, you know, something that I learned with my circle around me, with a lot of like, especially growing up, I always use white center. Like, I'm connected to land. I'm like, I always use growing up in white center, like, um, talking about your emotions and stuff is stigmatized in our community. And so having the first conversation with your parents, like in our culture, they'll be like, "Tuko fie poto." Like that means like, stop trying to think like you know everything, like, and it's like, what? But I know that I feel that I'm being oppressed, like, like, sorry, I'm just laughing because it's funny to me. Like, I'm like, dang, like, and sorry, but like, yeah, like it's not an easy conversation. And I think for me too, like, I mean, I don't know if y'all remember, even in the Pika one when we had it last year, I couldn't even speak. Like, I could not speak. I literally had a flashback, and someone had written like, can we acknowledge um how childhood trauma actually, like how we internalize childhood trauma and how it impacts us as adults. And it's like, yeah, like I would like Lourdes was just going on and was like, Sola, would you like to read the slide? And I couldn't. Like I froze. And so I just want to send a lot of love and encouragement, um, that taking the first step, it might cause a lot of drama. It might, it might open up a can of worms. Um, but it's like, I hope you take care of yourself when you do, because like once you open up that conversation, there's no going back. Like you can't take it back. But I can tell you, speaking from a whole year later, that it's probably one of the healthiest things that me and my mom had. Like I think it built our relationship between mother and daughter up. Um, and probably people think it's weird. Like they're like, "Wow, you're so loving on your mom," like in like such a deep, comfortable type way. And I'm like, shouldn't we all be like that? Like, isn't this how it should always be? Isn't this how mothering and nurturing was like before harm and all of that? Like, but yeah, I just wanted to name that. And yeah, just sending a lot of love to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to ditto off of what Stella said because um, being from we're actually related too, but so we know each other's family, but just coming from our families, it wasn't an easy conversation to go back and um, revisit those times of harm with our mothers. Um, it wasn't until probably the last, I want to say 2, 3 years that my mom and I started having dialogue around what was really happening during my childhood and what was happening in her early years of marriage and what she was dealing with when she was going through domestic violence. So it's not something that is, in our communities that's easily talked about. But I think if you really get to a place where you can take your parent or somebody, that has been there during the harm, during your childhood and having that conversation and dialogue, man, it just really opens up like this can of worms that may seem hard at first. But once you start delving into that and start bringing up, like, hey, do you remember when we went to church and this and this and this happened? What really happened? Dude, like, when you start getting their point of view and what they saw happen, and you share with them what you saw happen, like it just brings about like this total different world that you didn't realize was going on, during your time. And I think it's just so important to open that up if you can with anybody that you grew up with and start talking about, those old time stories that you thought were just old time stories. But it turns out that it's actually important conversations to bring up and relive.
Thank you.
Love it. And yeah, I just wanted to close by naming and honoring that, if this is your first time reaching out or naming that you are a survivor, or that you have survived a lot, like I just want to echo to take so much care, and that in hopes that there are loved ones, there are community, and there are community of survivors that understand. And for myself as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, it's taken me a very long time, right, to like access this healing. And I knew like by opening up that box, by opening up that portal, it was very painful. And coming, like being able to come to a place now in my life where I've been doing a lot of healing. I think it's really important that, as a parent, as a survivor, that I also share those tools of healing with my community and with my loved ones. So I'm just extending so much care and love to folks. Give love to yourselves, give love to like your loved ones. Continue honoring the bodies and autonomy of each other, and especially our children and elders. Love up on your queer and trans loved ones and disabled loved ones, and our sex workers in this work too, and our incarcerated family as well. I think all of these things are so interconnected to the ways that we have and continue to fight against and survive violence. So I think healing is so important in this process. So much love. So much love to everyone.
Great. Well, again, thank you all for being here. And seriously, like, we seriously appreciate each of you being here and sharing your knowledge and like doing the hard work of bringing this topic to our community's attention. I don't think it's easy, and like Stella was saying, like, we might get blowback for it, but again, like, you do this work out of the heart, and we can all really tell that this is something that you truly are passionate about and want to see a change in. And at the PI Health Board too, we also would like to see a change and are definitely alarmed by the uptick in domestic violence cases since COVID. So if there was a time to bring this up, like, now is the time. So again, thank you so much. And we're hoping to be able to do a series with you all. So next time we'll dive a little bit deeper and just get into some of the more like specific cases and specific instances of domestic violence that we can experience. And yeah, just hopefully see a change in our community. And for anybody watching at home, thank you for tuning in. We're glad that you did. If you have any questions for APICHAYA, we're going to put the banner back up for their helpline. So if you need anything or you need any assistance, go ahead and call them. And if they can't specifically help you, they'll find you an organization and they'll do the work to find you the help that you need. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Be blessed.
You as well.